Monsieur le Président de l'Union africaine, Excellences, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, all protocol observed. President Mohamed Ould Ghazouani, thank you for your leadership in the outstanding exercise of your mandate. Presidente João Lourenço, parabéns e aguardo com expectativa a oportunidade de trabalhar consigo como novo Presidente da União Africana. I also want to give a very special expression of gratitude to the Chairperson of the African Union Commission, Moussa Faki, for his 8 years of strong and permanent commitment to multilateralism and impeccable cooperation with the United Nations. Cher Moussa, travailler avec toi est un privilège, un plaisir et un honneur. Excellencies, the partnership between the African Union and the United Nations has never been stronger. Together, we see an Africa booming with hope and possibility. You have a booming, enterprising population, including the largest number of young people in the world. The African continental free trade is poised to turbocharge the region's economy, and calls to address the legacies of colonialism and slavery are growing louder, as reflected in your theme this year, and as reflected in the leadership of so many passionate voices for the liberation of Africa, such as the great Dr. Sam Nujoma of Namibia, whose life we celebrate and whose loss we mourn. The world must never forget that Africa is the victim of two colossal and compounded injustices. First, the profound impact of colonialism and the transatlantic slave trade. The roots stretch back centuries, and the bitter fruit continues to affect Africans and people of African descent to this day. Decolonization alone in itself was not a panacea. Political independence did not free countries from structures based on exploitation and decades of economic, social, and institutional underinvestment. It is high time for reparatory justice frameworks to be put in place. Second, Africa was under colonial domination when today's multilateral system was created, and that injustice endures. Look no further than the United Nations Security Council. There is no excuse that Africa still lacks permanent representation in the 21st century. I will keep working with the African Union and all member states to ensure the representation Africa needs and the justice you deserve, including with 2 permanent members of the Security Council. And we will keep pressing together for an international financial architecture that is no longer outdated, dysfunctional, and unfair. Correcting age-old injustices is essential to address here and now challenges. And the good news is that we have many of the solutions we need. Last year, you helped drive that effort at the United Nations with the Pact for the Future. And I thank Africa for its support that was vital to approve the Pact. Our task now is to make those commitments a reality. South Africa's G20 chairmanship could not come at a better time. Let me point to 4 areas for action. First, we must push for peace, security, and alleviating appalling levels of human suffering. Sudan is being torn apart before our eyes and is now home to the world's largest displacement crisis and famine. As we near the holy months of Ramadan, it is time for an immediate cessation of hostilities. And the international community must come together to stop the flow of weapons and the bankrolling of bloodshed. In the Democratic Republic of the Congolese people have been suffering yet again from a brutal cycle of violence. And the fighting that is raging in South Kivu as a result of the continuation of the M23 offensive threatens to push the entire region over the precipice. Regional escalation must be avoided at all costs. There is no military solution. The deadlock must end, the dialogue must begin, and the sovereignty and territorial integrity of the DRC must be respected. The conclusions of the recent joint EAC-SADC summit offer a way forward, with a renewed call for an immediate ceasefire and new momentum for regional efforts based on the Luanda and Nairobi processes. Now is the time for swift implementation. And you can count on the continued support of the United Nations, including MONUSCO. In the Sahel, the clear and present threat of terrorism is undermining peace, security, and sustainable development. And in Somalia, we are urging predictable funding for the African Union support and stabilization mission, and I hope that our voice will be heard by the Security Council. And as we gather here in Africa, I know all our minds are also very much on Gaza. A resumption of hostilities must be avoided at all costs. The Palestinian people have suffered too much. I welcome efforts by the parties to abide by the ceasefire agreement and urge action for a permanent ceasefire and the release of all hostages. Peace is possible in the Middle East, and that starts with tangible, irreversible, and permanent progress towards the two-state solution, Israel and Palestine, living side by side in peace and security. Excellencies, on all fronts, we stand shoulder to shoulder with the African Union to advance security, stability, human rights, and rule of law. Excellencies, second, we must keep working together to deliver the AU 2063 agenda and the 2030 agenda for sustainable development and drive action on finance. African countries pay up to 8 times more to borrow than developed countries, and 20 are in or at risk of debt distress. The Pact for the Future supports an international financial architecture reform to reflect today's economy, ensuring fair representation and urging effective action on debt relief. And I will stand with Africa as a matter of justice and to right the historic wrongs. Excellencies, third, the climate crisis. Climate disasters are tearing across Africa, destroying lives, upending livelihoods, devastating economies, and inflaming conflict. At the same time, the renewables revolution is unstoppable, and Africa is poised to become a global clean energy powerhouse. Yet, today, Africa receives just 2% of global renewables investment. Realizing Africa's potential requires access to affordable finance, including by implementing the COP29 finance decision fully and on time, and supporting development of a roadmap to realize $1.3 trillion a year. Excellencies, Africa has contributed little to the climate crisis, yet is paying the price with record droughts, floods, and heat. Climate justice requires a massive investment in adaptation, with the international community bearing an enormous responsibility. Developed countries must double adaptation finance, and countries must significantly boost the loss and damage fund. Allow me a note. When the Loss and Damage Fund was created, the pledging conference that took place has allowed for an amount that is equivalent at the highest contract for a basketball player in the United States. It is absolutely necessary to make the Loss and Damage Fund an effective instrument to support developing countries in adaptation. And we also need justice when it comes to your abundant critical minerals. Too often, your countries are plundered, bound to the bottom of value chains as others grow rich on your resources. The work of the United Nations Panel on Critical Energy Transition Minerals is designed to help embed justice, sustainability, and human rights across the value chain. Africa's minerals must benefit Africa's people. Excellences, enfin, nous devons agir dans le domaine des nouvelles technologies, notamment l'intelligence artificielle. Près de 2/3 de la population africaine sont privés d'un accès fiable à l'Internet. Nous avons une responsabilité historique, faire en sorte que l'intelligence artificielle profite à l'humanité tout entière et pas seulement à quelques privilégiés, États et compagnie. Le pacte numérique mondial partage les ambitions du pacte numérique africain. Connectivité universelle, renforcement des capacités et une gouvernance responsable de l'intelligence artificielle. Je présenterai bientôt un rapport sur les modèles innovants de financement volontaire et les initiatives de renforcement des capacités afin d'aider les pays du Sud global à exploiter l'intelligence artificielle pour le bien commun. Ensemble, assurons-nous que les promesses seront tenues. Excellences, l'Union africaine et l'ONU sont unies et déterminées à rendre justice à votre continent sans laisser personne de côté. Nous disposons de bases solides pour aller de l'avant. Alors, ensemble, concrétisons ces engagements. Et permettez-moi de dire une dernière phrase dans ma langue maternelle. Digamos com uma só voz, viva África!